and used, and so I selected a number of those. And I think that indicated to me that we all curate our own lives to a certain extent by what we choose to keep and where we choose to keep it. And Margaret was the first to articulate that among us. But then I realized that's not uncommon. I think we all do that. And then,
well, I'm going to jump in and tell one bad story on you, which is that the curator also has to make very hard choices. Because one of the other things that was in that trunk is a flight suit that is very similar, not the same, Valerie would point out, as the one that we already have on display at the museum. And Valerie very badly wanted a second flight suit. And we said, you know, when we come back to the museum, they're going to say, we have a flight suit. Why do you need a second one? And Patty and I kind of collectively talked Valerie down from you can't have everything. You cannot have everything, and you have to make some choices. And we kind of kept, on our way to the airport, kept thinking Valerie's going to turn the car and like go flying back to that trunk because she desperately wants the next flight suit that's slightly different. It did have slightly different patches, but we said, you know, when we come back to the museum, they're going to ask hard questions about why did you get a second flight suit when we very clearly, you know, we have one. You know, the museum has one. So sometimes even sometimes the sorting is easier, and then sometimes you're making very hard choices to leave behind things that are kept in very good hands, but that you'd love to have in the National Collection, and you have to make some hard choices.
You did let me take a flight jacket, though.
The flight jacket is a completely different garment.
Right. Okay, Patty, let's talk about papers, because that's a whole different universe.
Yes, it is. And as we've been talking here about the artifacts, and I think when people think about museums, they immediately think, oh, of course, artifacts. But the museum has a very, very fine collection of papers dealing with aviation and space history. In fact, we have over 17,000 linear feet of papers. And historically, they've always kind of dealt with the technological advances that was happening in the aviation and space field. But I've actually been the acquisition archivist now for 26 years, and I've always been very keen to collect the papers of the people behind those technological advances, because I really think that's an important part of the history. And that's especially the case when it comes to collecting papers on women and minorities, because their stories on participating in these technological, mostly male-oriented fields really touches on a lot of social and cultural aspects that make aviation and space history that much richer. And so I was absolutely delighted when Tam reached out to us and said that she had this material. And when I went out there, I was looking for, and I was excited about it for two reasons. Number one, just I knew our researchers in general would be very interested in just the general space aviation material that was in it, but then to take into account Sally's iconic role as the first American woman in space would be just a wonderful resource for our researchers and for our staff. And it would also help complement the artifacts that Valerie and Margaret were picking out. So I went out there and I was looking not only to collect material dealing with her space accomplishments, but just like Valerie and Margaret, I was looking to try to put those space accomplishments as much as possible into the context of her entire life and her professional career. And so I was going to go out there looking for material that happened before she was selected as an astronaut, and then, of course, the period she was an astronaut, and then that large segment afterwards when she was doing she was being a scientist and a professor and an advocate for STEM education. And so I ended up taking 24 linear feet of material. Basically, I took everything Tam would let me take from the house. And I have to say that you said Sally was a hoarder. I've been doing this for 26 years. I have been in hoarder houses. Your house was great. Okay. And Sally was very organized. Again, she very much curated her material. Yep. Almost everything I ran across, I said, wow, that really puts this aspect of her career in a sharp contrast to other parts. So I thought it was all very useful. And what I'd like to do with my segment is I'd like to show you some examples of some of the material that I selected. And I'd like to start with material that I think most people would say, oh, of course you collected this material because it's dealing with her astronaut career. And so what was just on the screen was the checklist for the Canadian arm that she did on her first flight, STS-7. And if we go to the next slide, we can see this is an example of one of the training manuals she had. We collected about 2 linear feet of material just dealing with her astronaut training and her manuals. You can see on the sketch here the Canadian arm coming out the top. That was one of Sally's tasks that she was to do. She was the first woman to do it in space, and that helped her retrieve a satellite. And you can see also what I love about her training materials is that she has marked up, she's highlighted just like you would for any class that you were trying to make sure you passed the exam. Highlighted things, and she also annotated things along the way. So that'll be really useful for our researchers who are interested in understanding the training that the Space Shuttle astronauts were going through. And I'd like to segue from there into a couple of things, talking about Sally's iconic role as being the first American in space. It was first American woman in space. It was a really big deal on both kind of the public arena and also on a private level. So if we can go to the cartoon. Here's a cartoon from the Minneapolis Star Tribune. And this is really kind of touching on, and this was something that Sally evidently had carefully cut out and saved, talking about the stereotyping she had to deal with becoming the first woman astronaut in space. And I just think it's very indicative on the kind of things that were happening on the public area on a larger scale. But if we go to and show something on a more intimate scale, this is a letter that she got from somebody she didn't know, Linda Halpern. And Linda contacted Sally and sent her a copy of this letter that is being shown on the screen. Linda, when she was a girl in 1962, sent a letter to President Kennedy asking how she could become a woman astronaut. And President Kennedy sent it over to NASA, who wrote her back and said, you know, thank you very much, but women aren't astronauts because you don't have the training and you're not physically able to do it. And Linda had actually saved this all these years, sent a copy of this along with a letter to Sally saying, for me, this is such an exciting thing that you're finally breaking this barrier for all of us that were denied that opportunity. So I really love this example. And there's lots of examples of this, from senators to famous people to people who aren't famous at all, like this woman who grew up to be she's a tort lawyer, but it really made an impression on her. So from there, I'd like to talk about, after she flew, she continued to play very important roles in NASA. As Margaret talked about, she was the main author led the RIDE report, which was about kind of strategically where NASA should go. But she also sat on several commissions that were very important. This is one of her notebooks. She was on the Rogers Commission, which was for the dealing with the disaster, the Challenger accident. And she was the only astronaut that was asked to be on this. And this is the outside of her notebook. And if we can go to the next slide, we can show these are actually the notes that she wrote as she was going through these. And these are fascinating and going to just be very interesting for our researchers that were going through what the problems were with that flight when it exploded, and what the commission members, specifically Sally, were thinking about how to get NASA back on track. For example, these pages are kind of showing the problems with they didn't have enough parts, they didn't have enough time, basically they didn't have enough resources, so a major problem that NASA was having. So that's kind of the things that people would expect us to have. But I also collected, if we can go to her physics, I don't know how well you can see this, she did keep all her physics homework, which is like amazing. Now, I can't tell you what this says or means because I'm a historian, but the fact that she kept it and was so interested in it, I think really speaks. So I took them all. I took probably a box of her undergraduate work. She had a undergraduate degree in both physics and English. And you can see how that just really, being a physicist was very important to her. Not only did she keep all those, it shows how interested she was in science. And I also collected material dealing with what happened. I'm sorry, you can go back to the other one. I wanted to show how it kind of continued on. This is, after she left NASA, she went back, she was a professor at University of California at San Diego, and she published over 40 papers, mostly based on her physics research. So she was an incredible physicist. And the other one that you can go to now is her English homework, which I love because the professor wrote on this, I hope you're as good as physics as you are in literature, which you're very fine indeed, which, and yes, she was. And I think one reason I collected her homework from college is it really shows how she was setting herself up to be an excellent scientist and a great communicator, which is what her English degree brought her. And that's why she was so sought after, I think, on commissions. She was a person of integrity, but she could understand the science and she could communicate it with others, and that's what made her so very successful at that. And then the last thing I'm going to do is I have to show my favorite picture that I found, which is a mocked-up picture of Sally reading a childhood book, and somebody had done a thought bubble, and those are some of the controls that would have been in her on the space shuttle. And this was actually, I didn't see this the first time around until I got back. This was actually in that first manual I showed you on the first page, so she took that up into space with her to remind her.
That is a
Very
great
good.
segue. The picture of Sally with a book
Yeah.
is a great segue back to Tam, to
Yeah.
let Tam talk for a couple of minutes, if you'd like, about the process of writing your new book, a very personal biography of Sally by the person who knew her best in the world. Would you like to share with us a little bit about what is it like to be a biographer?
You know, is it really, I thought about writing a children's book about Sally for a lot of different reasons. And I started working on it 6 months after Sally died, and it was simultaneously torture to be thinking about her, looking through photographs and so on, but it was also very comforting and a good process for me. And, you know, what I really cared about was writing a book that told the story, kind of the true story about Sally, who she was, what she was really like, what she cared about, and at least some of the very cool things that she accomplished. You know, of course, being the first American woman to fly in space, but all the other stuff too, that, you know, she was a person, she didn't cash in on her celebrity. She worked, you know, and she dived into the things that interested her and worked really hard. And I think that's an important story for boys and girls, you know, across our country to know. And the other thing is that, you know, this is a very personal book, and but the other thing that I think is so important is that there are very few biographies, especially about American heroes, who are gay or bisexual or whatever whatever the right little box is. So I just thought it was important to tell the true story, and you know, young people are very savvy, and young people, you know, even in upper elementary school, are they're smart, and they see what's going on in the world, and they have opinions, and I think young people, maybe even more than us older folks, you know, kind of respect individuality and people's decisions. Anyway, I just thought it was an important story to get right and to be honest about. And what I really hope is that, you know, the young people who happen to read the book, you know, kind of come away and go, wow, what a fun and full life Sally Ride had. And then the other thing I kind of hope that they come away with is sort of like, you know, you know, love is love, no matter the gender of the couple. You know, love is the bottom line. So, and I was very fortunate because Sally did save so many, you know, I had just this treasure of photographs. And so, you know, I'm lucky, you know, I worked hard on the writing, and I actually did the writing first. And then I'd gone through all the photographs, so I kind of knew which ones would fit in the various places. But I wrote the story first and then added the photographs. But the photographs are just amazing, you know, and just help help tell the story of her life.
And we have that book here today, and immediately after this program, Tam will be going to our shop and we'll be signing books there. So if anyone's interested, you can chat with her for a few minutes, talk about the book, and have a little one-on-one time to ask some other questions. But before we close out the program, I'd love to hear a few more questions from our audience, and I see we have a couple lined up, so go ahead, please.
My name is Nia, and I'm from Whittier. And my question is, what is Sally's favorite subject and why?
What was her favorite subject?
Do you want to answer
Sure.
that? What was her favorite
What's
subject?
your favorite subject?
I like reading.
You like reading?
Yeah.
Okay, actually, Sally loved to read. And so she loved to read all sorts of books. And I think, probably starting in middle school, science became, kind of rose on the list and became her favorite subject. And then by the time she got to the end of high school and college, it became physics. Who knows what physics is? No, it's the it's the law. It's the way the universe works. It's the fundamental forces and forces is probably the way to say it. Forces and particles that determine everything. And she was just fascinated to know that. And she also was a little bit, she liked that physics was hard. So that she could say, I'm a physicist. I learned that hard stuff. I'm pretty cool. Thank you for your question.
Let's take an online question, which is, what was the most surprising thing you learned about Sally Ride doing your research?
We did that one.
I think we did that
We
one,
did
but
that.
I know what we found when we got to the house to work through things. I would be kind of
Yes.
curious to know, to you, going through the process of re-examining all of these things and trying to write the biography, what's the most surprising thing that you learned during your research?
That is a hard question. It wasn't a surprise, but it was kind of a wonderful reminder. And actually, the 1-minute video of Sally, you see it in there. And it was like, Sally enjoyed her life. She had fun. She was smiling in almost every shot during the video. She was having fun with her teammates. She was having fun being in space. And you kind of imagine a person being very serious or maybe scared or all sorts of things. And she was absolutely in the moment having fun. And that was really Sally. So I, looking back and talking to her mother and her sister and having them, retell the family stories and the trip to Europe and various things, Sally had a really good life. And the reason she had a good life, she was blessed with a very solid, stable family, but she was also really blessed with the ability to live in the present moment. When you were with Sally, she was with you. She wasn't distracted, she wasn't looking back, she wasn't looking forward. And she had a very fun and fulfilling life. So yeah, it was kind of that reminder that, she had fun. She was a happy kid. She was a happy teenager. She was a happy astronaut. It's just kind of cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And apropos of that, when she landed after her first mission, she said, I think that's the most fun I will ever have in my life. So, yes, do you have a question?
My name is Kasir Pervez, and I'm from Whittier Education Campus. And my question is that, how does her athletic ability help her to be an astronaut?
How does her athletic ability help her to be an astronaut?
Good question. Good question.
And Margaret addressed that a minute ago, but you're an athlete too. Maybe you could comment on some of the characteristics.
I actually think it's two things. It's especially at that time, it's sort of the uniqueness of it makes you stand out. if you apply for a job or even apply to go to college, if you have something else, that you're on a soccer team or you play volleyball or you play tennis, it makes you stand out. Okay. And so that helped Sally, and that's what Margaret was referring to when Sally applied to become an astronaut in 1977. But the other thing is playing sports and having to work with coaches and teachers and teammates, and also being in competition. You don't win all the time. You lose, and you got to learn to cope with that. And that's my mic, sorry. And so there's lots of really cool lessons you learn from sports or playing a musical instrument or any of the other extracurricular things that you love. They help you with all aspects of life. So, and Sally, as part of our company, this is beyond your question, but I go off. But Sally would, as part of our company, would give talks around the country. And many times parents or teachers would say, I've got this smart kid, boy or girl, and but the trouble is, the trouble with my daughter or son is that they like football or they want to play the clarinet. And Sally would say, so what? Let them do it. To be a scientist or to be anything, you don't have to just do one thing. Because if you follow the things you enjoy doing, they help, everything kind of reinforces everything else. Sure. Anyway, sorry for a 48-hour-long question and answer.
If I could comment on the photograph we had with the 4 girls lined up at the net on the tennis court, the one that is second from the left is Tam O'Shaughnessy, and the one on the right side is Sally Ride. And you were both about 14 then, competing against each other.
Yes.
And if I recall the story, you were actually the better player. You played pro for a while.
I would say that, and Sally can't deny it. She can't change the story.
Oh, well, I think this has been...
we might have one last.
Oh, okay.
I'm Charlotte York from Atlanta, Georgia. And my question is, men and women were traditionally kept separate, like in the military, and here she is, a woman in space with all these men. And I just wonder how that was for her. How did they treat her as a woman? That's my question.
Yeah. So,
I think they treated her
like
as
a
one of the
professional.
guys, and she considered herself one of the guys. She used that phrase, and Margaret can back me up on this. I think those first 6 women that were selected into the astronaut corps did not want any concessions made to them because of their sex. The only thing they asked for was a separate restroom and shower in the gym at Johnson Space Center. But other than that, you're on a crew, you're all there to accomplish your mission, you all carry the same load, and you're part of a team. And by the time they actually flew in space, they had been sharing an office together for more than a year. They had been on wilderness survival training together. They were essentially a family. It was like, in a way, it was hard work, but it was also like going camping with your best friends. So she never reported any discomfort. I think she did suggest that they add a privacy curtain to the toilet compartment, which is literally a little closet almost, and it was awkward to close the door. So she suggested a curtain, and they all benefited from that.
I think NASA worried a lot before women joined the astronaut corps about how would this work in such a small space. And part of the reason it worked is that those first 6 women, Sally Ride and the others who were in that class from 1978, were so good at what they did. I mean, they were just deeply competent. If they were given a task, they learned every part of the task. And that was in a group of 35 new shuttle astronauts who were all deeply competent, get that job without working very hard. And so I think they proved themselves equal to that. And then by the time they went into space, they weren't thinking about, oh, this is the one woman, or this. They were a group with a task, and they were all very interested in doing it well.
Yeah, I would say that I think the astronauts felt that way. I think the public was who had the difficulty kind of with that. And you get the kind of sense of frustration if you see Sally in any of her interviews when You know, they're asking, you know, do you cry when you get upset? And she's like, I bet you don't ask the guys that question. And, you know, so I think that was very frustrating for her. But within the crew themselves, they were also such competent professionals. I don't think they saw it at all. I mean, it was just, you know, a crew together, so.
Right. There were folks who had roses for her when she landed.
Yes.
And she did not take them, but there were not roses for the whole crew. So she was not interested in being singled out in that way, you know, some sort
Yeah.
of Miss America moment.
Right.
And I think for a person who never sought celebrity, she did gradually learn how to cope with celebrity, but she really lived her life as a private person, and when she needed to be in public, she could adopt that role, but I think it took a toll on her. It exhausted her. Some people are energized by being in the